So my name's Alex. I am one of the SEs here at SonicWall. Just a little bit of background. I am an engineer, or I was an engineer for around 15 years for a partner and the security switching. Obviously at SonicWall here, I look after our product suite, and I'm here with NetThreat to talk about DPI-SSL and ransomware. NetThreat, who have an offering, so stay tuned, because at the end John will join us to talk about how NetThreat can help you with which is really quite a serious risk to networks today. It's certainly in the last sort of 6 months, I would say, the majority of my job, the emphasis has been on DPI-SSL. Okay, so I will explain what it is and how it works. So don't worry if I've just blurted out some words and it doesn't mean anything, and why it's serious. These are not scare tactics. I know that's typical for someone like me to come on here and try and say scary stuff in order to sell something, but it really is a risk, and it was something I was dealing with certainly before I was in this position. Okay, you're welcome to fire chat stuff, and I will try and check in on it, just in case. But yeah, without further ado, I will crack on. If this cough lets me. Right. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the threat and what we have going on today. So and there's a few slides coming up about why this has happened, but the nature of DPI-SSL and what it's there for is that a lot of the threats that we see today are getting into your network in an encrypted fashion. So what we've got on the screen there is just quite a few examples of traffic that is encrypted. You've got Tor there, ways to access the dark web. And if the traffic is encrypted, then you're limited in what you can do with your firewall. I would like to think that you all have next-gen firewalls, and if it's a next-gen, you're doing deep packet inspection. Which basically means that rather than just doing the old-fashioned stateful traffic, you are looking at the stuff in detail. Again, I've got a slide coming up. So, these are the methods that that viruses are getting into your network. Just a little heads up, I haven't got a slide on it here, but if you get a chance, and perhaps NetThreat can help provide this, have a look at the SonicWall annual threat report. It comes out every January, and in there you see the numbers that we sort of collate, and then we talk about the risks and so on. I definitely recommend that. If you need that, just buy something into the chat room. It just gives you an idea. Okay, I'm just gonna very quickly. For those who haven't, please mute your lines. I will mute you all, but I tend to get late joiners, so I'm just gonna do that anyway. But if you could all remember to mute your lines, that would be fantastic. Okay, on we go. I think the most common issue that we deal with as far as threats is concerned is ransomware. You may have a differing opinion, but I mean, certainly from a SonicWall point of view, those tend to be the conversations I have with regards to threats to their network, time wasting, and so on. Okay, so if you don't know what ransomware is, if you haven't been sort of following the news, especially back when WannaCry happened. It basically takes over, in its simplest form, it takes over your machine. Typically, it encrypts all of your files, and then it asks you to provide some money, probably in Bitcoin, in order to unlock your files. Now, I don't know about you, but if you can imagine for a second someone taking control of your personal machine, let alone your work machine, and then finding out that you can't access any of that data, and then being told that the only way you can do it is if you pay someone. And then you usually get a time limit. I mean, okay. I like to think that I have files backed up and in the cloud or on an external drive, but it's not something you want to deal with. You have to repair it. So you can imagine if that's your work laptop as well. Not great. So these are the sort of things you can expect to see, and perhaps one of you have seen these screens in your path. I certainly did as an engineer before I joined SonicWall. Not pleasant for the user, not pleasant for the support desk. And it's very disruptive. Okay, so a little bit outdated, these numbers. So I forgot to mention, I did this presentation in partial form back in July for the guys at NetThreat, and it was very successful, and it's still very current, which is why I'm sort of running it again, especially with the offering that NetThreat has. So again, if you've seen some of these slides, I do apologize. Just going to quickly, bear with me. There we go. Muted. And still they come. Lots of stragglers. Okay, so here's some numbers about what the threat is. So 50% of organizations are affected. 600% growth in ransomware families in 2016. If you looked at our threat report, you would see that for some reason that this affects the UK more than say the US. The suspicion is that it's down to the size of the business that we have. I mean, if you look at your business today, how big are you? It would seem that a certain business size is a more attractive proposition for a ransomware provider than say a large multinational, which is able to throw some money at this problem. Okay, so 2/3 of the kits that we see are geared towards ransomware. When we know why not? Why the need to be disruptive. If you're someone who creates a virus, hopefully not on this call. If you feel the need to create a virus and be disruptive and get sort of like kudos with your hacker buddies, why not make some money? And that's probably where the thinking is at. And it's considered to be quite successful. I read recently, whether this is true or not, that the Uber hack, if you're familiar with that story, they had all their details compromised and they ended up paying. Although it wasn't really ransomware, Uber paid to have the data protected. And there's a whole GDPR thing, but I'd like to think that we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. The bit about the Bitcoin in the bottom right-hand corner, I would suggest that that's not accurate anymore. I know the Bitcoin has gone up in value since then. All right, okay, so just how ransomware works, and it's not necessarily always like this. This is typically this is a good example because it isn't just ransomware affecting the computer, it affects stuff across the network. So whether you've had a ransomware incident or not, I think it's important to know that how this stuff happens. So if we start at the top left, there an email comes. I think we've all seen some spam in our lifetime. If you haven't, well, you're either very lucky or you've been living in a cave. Typically, a malicious spam will have a link. You click on that link, and then you will download that file onto your machine, and then you're in trouble because once you've executed that file, it will start propagating across the network, whether it's just encrypting your machine, and then if it finds network shares like WannaCry did, it will jump across the network, and then it will see those other machines with the same ransomware. I believe that's one of the big things that the NHS suffered from with WannaCry in particular. I mean, you're probably aware that WannaCry wasn't targeted at the NHS. It just so happened that they were particularly vulnerable, through circumstance. So this is one of the ways that it goes through. So it's worth mentioning here that a lot of times the file comes in encrypted. So whereas encryption was a handy thing to have for your privacy, it's a double-edged sword, and we'll see some more in a success. And there's just a little note there at the bottom that some of these ransomware, perhaps a desperate user who wants their data, wants their pictures of their holidays and whatnot, they will pay the key, and it doesn't necessarily always guarantee that the files will be unlocked. That's unscrupulous and unsavory, these guys are. No honor amongst thieves, I say, but maybe this is a different time. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about the difference of the sort of traffic that comes through your network, and I think it's very important to understand the sort of file that you have and what it's capable of. Unfortunately, I still see a lot of customers who have a firewall, and they've got the firewall in, and regardless of the make, the vendor, and how it's configured, they think that's it, job done. I've got a firewall here, it's blocking stuff. It's like saying I have a front door and I'm not prepared to look at how sturdy the lock is, or whether or not I have a 4-foot by 4-foot cat flap or something like that. Probably a bad analogy, but speaking of analogies, we're gonna go through what that means. So stateful packet inspection. Now, there was a time when every firewall I certainly installed, and I'm sure that every firewall that NetThreat installed, was only capable of stateful packet inspection. We're going back a few years. The analogy we have here is of this traffic officer there on the road and seeing all these cars driving past. He or she is looking at those cars and can see a number plate and can see a a badge, and it can see the direction it's going, and then you can make an assessment of where that traffic is going. In firewall speak, I suppose IP address and port number, if that means anything to you. You can ascertain the traffic, and there was a time when we had to manage traffic by that. So if a customer had asked me to block some traffic, I would like to know the source, the destination, and what the port number that application used. Now, the challenge is nowadays applications don't necessarily have their own dedicated port. In fact, a lot of them use the same port, port 443 that's encrypted, or maybe even port 80, because it's web traffic. And for that, you need to look a bit deeper. Okay, so then we've got deep packet inspection. So now we're into next-gen firewall territory, of which yours truly, SonicWall truly, I should say, does. So you now have a firewall that's able to look within that car and see what's going on, to better qualify and better justify stopping, allowing, and so on. So, you've got Superman there, and he's staring through the car, and he can see what's in the boot, whether it's legitimate or not, and then you can make a decision to how to manage that, whether it's to block it, or to let it through, and so on. So you've got staple packet inspection and deep packet inspection so far. Okay, the next step is what do you do if it's encrypted? So, as well as being able to see inside the car, what if you can't see inside the car because, well, the car's covered in lead. If you're familiar with Superman, he can't see through lead. So, I suppose another analogy is you want to open the car and have a look inside, and all the doors are locked, and you can't get in. You don't have the key. That for us is encrypted traffic. So what you have now, you got some packets of data. All the information is private, and then you might know what the application is, but you just can't do anything after that. You're just going to have to either rely on it not to be dangerous and forward it on, or maybe block it, and then that obviously won't be popular. Just to give you an idea of how much traffic is encrypted, I think it's around 70%. That number is increasing all the time. Around about 70% of all internet traffic is encrypted. So if you think of your Gmail connection, your Google search, all HTTPS. So it's difficult to scan any payload and see what it is. Okay, so where's this all come from? I mean, the Snowden effect is something that was probably coined a lot more if you go back a couple of years, but it always crops up, and the knowledge that our data was being looked at or tapped by either the government or hackers or whatever, and he sort of made a lot of information public, whether it's true or not, or how prolific it is. It made people and companies and businesses and applications realize that if they're not encrypting their communication, then it can be seen. And for those of you who are aware of GDPR, that is out next year. Is it next year? Yeah, 2018. If your data is compromised, and if a user takes that data and gets the details of a European citizen, although that in all likelihood will change, you're in violation, and you can get a fine. So a lot of these companies started encrypted everything, sort of got rid of their just standard HTTP connection. And then that's great, and our privacy is assured, and we can sleep better at night. The problem is obviously that data can be used to cover dodgy payload. So in the back of that locked car, it could be something like a bomb or drugs or whatever. You get the idea. Okay, so that's the need, and this is something very much that we're dealing with at the moment. So what is a traditional SSL connection? So to use the webmail example, so Gmail, you've got the servers there on the top left. Those are the Gmail servers, and there's your laptop, and you initiate a connection. You exchange a certificate. You have a security key so that whatever's being sent over encrypted, only the laptop can access it. So if anyone intercepts that data on the way, perhaps you're using a tap, or you take that data and you can look at it, you won't have the key, and therefore you're not able to see what's inside of the payload. All right, so that's just just to use Gmail as an example. The reason why Gmail is a good example is if you're using your webmail client on your desktop and that's encrypted, then there's nothing to stop that link from passing that traffic, that malicious traffic. Okay, so what are SonicWall doing about it? So we do what is essentially a man in the middle. So if we're basically sitting in the way, and we're saying, okay, we're going to take over this conversation. So again, car analogy, perhaps it's a toll booth where the car will stop. We will, unlock that car because we will get given the key. We'll have permission to use the key and unlock it, and then we'll do all the checks, which is all the stuff you see in the middle. So, we'll see what application it is. We'll see whether it's infected, whether it's got any sort of patterns of IPS or whatever, and then we'll re-encrypt it and forward it on. So, in order to do that, we need to have the key to exchange with the Gmail servers. And we'll obviously need to have, and then the client here will need to have a key to exchange with SonicWall. So there's a bit of prep that needs doing. In order to have this position of trust, you can't just jump in and not do any preparation. So as you'll see shortly, there is some work that needs to happen. And a quick shout out to the NetThreat guys who are there and able to do this. Okay, so what is the solution? Well, and this is just using the Gmail example, which I mentioned earlier. So there's that link for what looks like a legitimate mail. I don't know about you guys, but if you're anything like me and you're eternally network paranoid, and even a legitimate mail, I sit there staring at it, waiting for it to have something dodgy, and maybe those telltale signs. Maybe you can see that the email address isn't theirs, or there's the spelling mistakes, and the logo isn't quite right. But that's not something that we all have the luxury of, and even the best of us can make mistakes sometimes. So this Gmail's come in, and the users seen that link and thought, wow, this looks legitimate. Good old John Adams, always does good stuff. I'll click on that link. Okay, and that's just to show that connection is encrypted. So even if you have a deep packet inspection firewall, we won't be able to analyze this because it's encrypted. So that second tier of security I mentioned, we need to take it one step further. Okay. All right. So here's the process that it happened. There's the Gmail servers serving up that web page. There's me, little green man there, making the connection direct, and it's all encrypted. So that communication's secure, and no one's going to mess with that, or at least we think not. So there's the SonicWall sitting in between. So you have your firewall there, whether it's a SonicWall or not. There's a firewall that sits in between, and that the traffic has to pass it, just like that toll booth will have to pass that car. All right. So we need to have a trust relationship between the client and the SonicWall, so that key is exchanged. In this case, it's provided by the SonicWall or the administrator of the SonicWall in the form of a certificate. So you'd need to install a certificate in the certificate store. So that little first step, that trust exercise, is there. And then we essentially hijack, although the word isn't a very good one. We hijack the certificate from the Gmail server and say, we were saying to the client there on the bottom left, look, we will take over that bit, and then we're able to take that traffic, decrypt it, do all our good stuff, re-encrypt it, forward it on. And as you can probably imagine, this is a fair amount of cycles per second for the firewall. There's a fair old bit of work that needs to happen, which is why sizing is important, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay, and so what are we doing when we decrypt it? I mean, are we just, what are we doing? So these are all functionality. This is all functionality of the SonicWall. So if you weren't already aware, I mean, perhaps you're an existing SonicWall customer, which is great. Hopefully you have your antivirus turned on, your anti-spyware, intrusion prevention, content filtering. Content filtering, obviously, looking for that will help with the websites, the reputation websites. Application control. Although in some applications you can tell what it is without DPI-SSL. A lot of the time, you need to be able to look inside the traffic to manage it better. And then capture. So I'm going to do a little bit about capture, which is the sandboxing functionality of SonicWall. So I will be jumping onto that. There is an aspect of it that absolutely needs to be where the traffic needs to be decrypted. So look out for that shortly. Okay, in fact that's right now. So what is capture? Well, capture is our sandboxing tool. It's all well and good having. If I go back to this diagram, it's all well and good seeing a virus come through on an attachment with DPI-SSL enabled, and we stop it. But what do you do if we've never seen that virus before? What do you do if there is a day zero attack? Let's stop from here. If there is a day zero attack and that's the first time a virus has been seen, and we haven't had a chance to develop it. Well, I mean, I certainly remember when dealing with Toniship first time, I said, wow, that's really unlikely. You know, what are the chances of you being the virus first? Well, you'd be absolutely surprised. And again, I draw your attention to the threat report. We often see viruses coming through SonicWall devices that haven't been seen anywhere else. The reason why? Well, it's easy to make ransomware. The kits are out there. You get people, and I tend to say kids, although I think we all know that it's not necessarily the case, especially when there's financial gain. They're taking these kits from the dark web, or maybe not even the dark web. Maybe it's just readily available on sites, and you know, they're putting their own little customization to it, and that immediately becomes a new virus or a new ransomware. And so you need to be able to see that. So what sandboxing does, we will take that file. And if you haven't seen it before, so if our antivirus engine, which our DPI engine is using, hasn't been seen before, we will fire that file out to the cloud, specifically the SonicWall Sandbox cloud. And there we will detonate that file. I've done a presentation on this before with the guys at NetThreat that we have much more detail. But, you know, a very high level, we've got 3 engines. We will detonate that file. And if any of those files start to do anything dodgy on our virtual systems, if they, you know, perhaps they're trying to delete the admin account or maybe just try to encrypt the files, you know, we will take that hit. And once something like that's been done, we will then reply to the SonicWall and say, look, you don't want to open this file. We've just did that. And, you know, it affected us, you know, save yourself and all the rest of it. Okay, so that's very high-level sandboxing, and if you want to talk about that in detail, again, NetThreat will absolutely help with that. Perhaps you can see the previous video that I've done with NetThreat. And but where SSL is an issue there is that what if that file is encrypted? If that file, it's all well and good us firing every file into the cloud and detonating it and then making sure it's okay. But if that file is encrypted, you know, you have to decrypt it again before we can do just the standard scanning, the antivirus here in the middle, and then the sandbox where it's fired into the cloud. So the key message, and I get bored of hearing myself say it because I'm always doing it, whether it's on these webinars or whether it's with customers in meetings, is that you have to layer your security. Yeah, you can never have enough layers. Well, you can, because at a point it becomes unusable and the users won't like it. But if these layers work well, if they're efficient, the user will not know, and then you're doing your security. So whether it's the sandboxing here, DPI-SSL with your client antivirus, or maybe you're just doing a good old-fashioned scan with a proxy on your network, layering is good, and it helps to mitigate the threat. Okay, the last time I did something like this, I had someone disagree with me. So, you know, if any of you are just seething red and disagree with me, and feel free to say something when I unmute the lines later on. And if you really offend me, I'll just block you. You know, I have that power. Anyway, I won't. That's a joke. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so yeah, so just to go over those things, these are all those layers that we're talking about. So DPI-SSL, we've already talked about that. DPI-SSH, that is something that we also do. I see limited need for this, but you know that might be relevant to your business where you want to decrypt SSH. The gateway antivirus, something that SonicWall have been doing for years, and any firewall worth its salt will not only have it, but will have it being enabled. It sounds a bit, you know, I just absolutely think that if you don't have a firewall that's capable of doing DPI inspection and antivirus on the perimeter, then you know you're being left behind, and then the risk is very real. Capture, we just talked about. IPS, intrusion prevention, botnet filtering. You know, we can look through those packets and see all those signatures. Okay, and there's a few other things there. The one I find particularly useful is application firewall. So again, the traffic won't necessarily be a risk or a threat, but knowing what the type of traffic is coming through. You know, if your firewall is able to tell you when a Facebook connection is coming through versus a torrent connection, or maybe it's just a BBC iPlayer connection, the minute you're able to identify it, you can manage it. You know, because those can use the same ports. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can use the same ports, and you know, you can't just block them with ports with your standard firewall. You need to manage that traffic. You need to say, right, BBC iPlayer is allowed, but not use more than 5 meg. BitTorrent, absolutely not allowed. You know, people are using that to download illegal material or whatever. And you know, Facebook, fine, you can use it, but maybe don't use it at lunchtime. You can do all of these things if your firewall is application ready. You know, so again, maybe each of your solution will be slightly different. The majority of my customers, don't have a problem with firewalls, but yeah, I do see them who absolutely want to block it, and that's a productivity thing. Okay, so don't think that this is all just for viruses. Email security. So we have an email security technology. I'm just going to shoehorn that in. You know, we can look at emails in detail in the cloud. By all means, get in touch if you want to know more. Network segmentation, I added that. Gone are the days where you've just got a firewall that passes traffic in and out, and then it disappears into a switch, and from there you execute your VLANs, and that's where your gateway is. The firewalls are capable of doing so much more. Move your gateway up to the firewall, and it means that you can segment your network so you can secure that traffic. All those things I said about the antivirus and so on, you can now do that between different VLANs in your company. Perhaps accounts or finance, you know, maybe they're accessing servers, or engineering are accessing servers. You know, perhaps you want to secure that. The firewall like the SonicWall will give you that means, and we absolutely recommend that you do that. Very important, network segmentation. Okay, so how do you do this? Now, you know, this is where the rub is, because it isn't easy. That's not a SonicWall thing. It's not SonicWall stopping it from being easy. It's an everyone problem. There are ways to streamline it, and we're always working on it. And for anyone who's following the SonicWall portfolio, the technology has means to do it a lot more efficient. The new file we've recently released, the 2650, can handle 20 times more encrypted connections than its predecessor. Just to give you an idea. So you know, it's important that we work on this. Yeah, but okay, here comes the bit where it needs to work, and this is why you need an engineer. Potentially need an engineer if you don't want to do this yourself. Okay, so right, don't sugarcoat the challenge. Why am I saying that? It's don't think it's okay. I'll just pass all this and it won't be a problem. A lot of the customers who I see implementing DPI-SSL do it as a reaction to an event that's happened. You know, and you know, this happens all the time. How often have we seen security issues in the real world, and then, you know, once they happen the next day, then the conversation is, what can we do to prevent this happening again? It's exactly the same with this. So, you know, I speak to a customer and say, oh yeah, yesterday we had a ransomware event. One of our users was locked out of his machine. We had to rebuild his machine. We had to move him to another desk, you know, phone line and so on. It needed an engineer half a day to do it. You know, you had the cost for that. You know, then, and that's it. It becomes more than worthwhile to try and do this. Okay, it's the certificates that are the issue. So by needing to deploy the certificates to all your internal users, essentially giving everyone a copy of a key, you know, there is some configuration therein. Okay, that's the hardest bit. But you know, if you've got the right team in doing this for you, then it doesn't have to be. You know, I needed some flooring done a week ago. This is a true story, actually. I needed some flooring done. I'm not going to do it. I've got stupid fingers, so I got someone in to do it. I had to pay someone to do it, but he did a good job. And you know, it's all been done. I think that's just stating the obvious. Okay, certificate pinning. Now there are applications that do what's called certificate pinning. So despite doing DPI-SSL, certificate pinning means that they will not share the certificate with us. That is the SonicWall. They will only share it with the end client. So you know, so immediately, you know, that there's a failure and a fault in DPI-SSL, and this is not just us. This is an everyone issue. So what do you do about that? I mean, I could tell you that Dropbox does certificate pinning. They don't scan their files. If you want to deal with those files, what do you do? I'll come to that shortly. I think I've got a slide on that as well. Another thing I see is that you're able to exclude some of the sites. If you just go out and do full-blown trust and says, that looks fine, I'll just let that through, you know, careful. I'll be taking a risk by doing it. Be network paranoid. Okay. Okay, there's a handy document there. I can put that in the chat room after. But we have a document which details a lot of the troubleshooting requirements for DPI-SSL. The reason why I list it there is because it's a huge document. There are a lot of scenarios. You know, it's the sort of thing that we work a lot with our partners, including NetThreat. You know, so that they know and they have the expertise to deal with those scenarios. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about certificate deployment. So establishing the trust. All right, so you need to know your operating system. You need to know your browser. I will use my home network as an example. When I deployed DPI-SSL at home, I've got a handful full of machines. My partner, she has a machine. She's a teacher, so she has a a laptop that she does all of her marking on. I had to roll out, once I enabled DPI-SSL on my SonicWall, it would have stopped her from working. So she would not be able to browse the internet and do everything that she needs to do her job properly. So I had to deploy the certificate. So one of the things I had to do is I had to have a conversation with her. Which browser do you use? You know, which operating system do you use, and so on. You know, the certificate store for I mean, I'm an Edge and a Chrome man. You know, I do use Firefox on occasion. You know, I don't know any engineer that doesn't really, but I only deployed the certificate for Edge and Chrome, so I had to install it in that certificate store, and there's about a dozen steps to get that done, you know, or thereabouts, and you know, so you know, it wasn't just a case of me doing click and done. I had to make sure it's done, and I had to deploy it on my machine, my work machine, my personal machine, my partner's laptop. You know, and you know, if someone came around and wanted to use there, or maybe work here, you know, what do? I'd either have to install a certificate or give them a bypass. All right. Sorry, I just missed that bomb bit there. So there's ways of deploying that certificate. I had to do it manually. So that was me browsing pages and downloading the certificate and installing it, and then, you know, click here and there. That you can do it with group policy. You know, but there are challenges with bring your own device. How do you enforce mobile phones, I suppose, to the certificate? There are solutions out there. There's some third-party solutions there. Watch this space. SonicWall are improving it, and we've got a release coming in the new year where there is a tool that deploys it with you know, a bit easier. But again, you still need to ascertain what's going on. You still need to configure the deployment. All right. So just to go over certificate pinning, I've already touched on it. So there you go. It's essentially, certificate pinning is there to resist impersonation. So it's there to resist people like SonicWall from scanning and doing legitimate things. Unfortunately, if you want to stop the bad guys, you will stop the good guys sometimes, and that's what we've got going on here. Okay, so the issue with Dropbox is quite a well-known one. Dropbox does certificate pinning if you have the client installed, and as I think SkyDrive, is it SkyDrive? Google Drive does the same thing. So what do? I mean, I've had some customers say, well, look, let's just let Dropbox through and hopefully we'll be okay. Other ones will say, no, we can't afford a file uploading a dodgy file to Dropbox and then us downloading it. We want to block it. Okay, so that's great. So the default in that scenario was stop Dropbox. Now, perhaps the issue there is that perhaps Dropbox is important. Perhaps it's your file sharing mechanism. Certainly with the client, it's not the end of the world. You can block the client, and then you can do Dropbox with the browser. So you know, there's a client there. So if you allow Dropbox with the browser, then fine. At that point, you can use the certificate and you can scan those files because that's just coming over HTTPS. That's not being pinned. Okay, so these are the decisions that you have to make. So, you know, if you are going to implement DPI-SSL, and again, I very much hope so that you will in preparation for next year. You know, you need to decide what you're going to stop. You know, many of the times that I've seen that the thought that needs to go into whether you can or can't. You know, the path of least resistance is just to allow these applications to go through. You know, don't do it. All you need is one event, and that's it. You could be liable for GDPR. I'm saying GDPR like you guys are all aware of it. I mean, I know there's a circuit where lots of people are having talks about it, so you know, feel free to ask if there's something you're not quite sure about. Okay, sizing, also a big challenge. I mentioned to you that the very fact that we decrypted this traffic, scanning and then re-encrypting, you know, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of cycles per second going through it. So there's only so many connections that a firewall, just like SonicWall, can handle. So I can tell you that your TZ400, just like what I have in front of this particular lab that I'm talking to you through, that has 500 concurrent connections. So I mean, that sounds like a lot, but I mean, on average, the individual machine, or actually I better stop and I better be careful what I say. I used to say on average it's 13 connections per user, but I think that's skyrocketed. So there are a lot more connections per second for an individual user. So if you're only going to scan 500 a second, well, that's not going to help if you've got 1,000 users sat in your building, you know. I know certainly with just me on my own on 2 machines, I can hit that 500 maximum. It's deliberate. I mean, I'm deliberately trying to do that just to test my technology, but I can do it. So, you know, you can go to the later models of the firewalls and then that number goes up. We also have a limit on how much bandwidth you can scan. So, you know, and if you look at our product sheet, I won't start rattling off numbers here, but you know, if you have a 100 meg line and you want to scan all of that, both inbound and outbound, then you've got a sum total of 200 meg. That's a very high level view of what you'd need. So you'd need to have a firewall that can cope with 200 meg of encrypted throughput. So you can see how, you know, the complexity of what you do. So I was saying for you to be network paranoid, but yes, you will have to pick your battles. There are already some exceptions built into the SonicWall for stuff that needs scanning, and I'll show you that shortly. But you know, there are just going to be some things that you will not need to decrypt and scan. Remember I said earlier about managing traffic between your VLANs. Perhaps you do trust accounts. Perhaps you know that accounts are not going to start sending viruses to support or HR or whatever. So you know, you might want to you would disable DPI-SSL for that. So you know, it needs planning. Okay, and again, so if you don't have DPI-SSL enabled on those internal links, well, you know, the box that you need may not be as large as you think. You know, we're here to help you calculate that. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna go through that. Sorry. Give me just a second. I'm just getting a bit of background noise. Okay. Right, the configuration. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every single tick box. I'm just going to give you an idea of what it is. You know, that's why I'm doing this with NetThreat. They can absolutely help with this. Okay, but I just need you to appreciate that it is complex. It's not just me blowing smoke. It's you know, this is the challenge, and I welcome anyone who uses a rival vendor or a different firewall, and then tell me that it isn't anything similar. Okay. The configuration. Okay, so when you log onto the firewall, now this is a pre 6.5 screen, so our new version of OS is slightly different, but you know it's recognizable. You click on DPI-SSL, immediately you'll notice that there's two options. There's client and there's server. Client is when, in the Gmail scenario, is where you have a user in your network doing stuff out on the internet. Server is when you're hosting a server with an encrypted connection and stuff is doing stuff to it. So you know that's essentially the direction. So client is obviously the one that's more. Well, it's more used, it's more important. Unless you're hosting websites, that's the one that you need to have. So you've got a nice general tab here, and that tells you what you want to do once you've done the DPI-SSL. So you can see all those security services. I mentioned the concurrent connections. There's a very handy bar here. It tells you what the current connection is, what the peak was, and what the maximum is. So just to give you an idea, if I jump to my firewall now, the middle and the last one will say 500. Because I pushed it, and my firewall hasn't rebooted it since then, or at least I don't think it has. Okay, so those are the things that you want to do. Best practice, have them all on. You absolutely want to search everything. Why would you not want to look for spyware if you're going to look for viruses? You know, just layer that security, you know, be as paranoid as possible. Yeah, so there are some settings here that we have in detail about. This is directly from our manual. This is being able to look at you know, authentication for the decrypted connection. I'm going to skip through this. Again, it's just there to give you an idea that it isn't just a tick box on and off and away you go. This is why you need someone, an engineer, on site to plan this. Okay. One of the ones that I kind of want to show you is this one here. This one's quite common. I think it's actually on by default, and what that does is that when you hit the maximum connections, anything after that, so like in my scenario where I had the 500 out of 500 connections, anything additional after that will just be allowed through. So I don't know if you've ever been to a football match lately. I go every now and then, and you've got guys at the gates with scanners, and you walk up and they scan you. I've also seen it that when it's quite busy, they you know, there's too many people queuing up, and the match is about to kick off. You know, you might get them sort of say, go on then, just go through, not to worry. You know, it's not great, but you know, that's an option that you have. You want to, if you hit the maximum, you can let something through. Again, this is a decision for you. You have to be aware of the risks that if you do that, you know. Okay, so yeah, just going to spin through that. You know, this stuff is in the manual. It gives you an idea of the complexity. Okay, the certificate side of it, the bit that we said was, you know, the hardest bit. We have certificates built into the SonicWall. Okay, that's that one here. So the certificate that I rolled out in my lab environment was the one that's on the SonicWall. You know, I downloaded the 2048-bit CA certificate, and then I installed that using the steps provided in the manual to all my machine. Okay, so that's, you know, you can download there. But you can install your own certificate with a wildcard. So that's something we also recommend. You know, if you get yourself a wildcard installed on the SonicWall, it will be unique to you. And then, you know, it basically means you're cutting your own key. Okay. Object. So no, you know, just because you enable it doesn't mean that everything has to be scanned. You can create your exceptions. So I'll give you a scenario. I've got a customer with a firewall, and he has a wireless guest zone, and that's where people can drop in. They don't need a password. It's just they jump on it and they can use the bandwidth. And you know, the idea is that they use that internet connection to do stuff relevant to their business. Now, having DPI-SSL on that, well, you don't want to break all of their connections from their smartphones, do you? You know, otherwise, you know, there'd be no use, and they won't be able to search for anything. So, you know, they exclude the entire wireless guest network. Now, and as long as that wireless guest network isn't accessing all important corporate information, well, then, you know, perhaps that's okay for you. It might not be for some of you, but it is for some. Again, you know, horses for courses. So that's where you specify your inclusions and exclusions. Okay. Yeah, so that's a very good point in there, actually. So what we always recommend is starting with a small group. So when I did it at home, I just did it for my home machine and made sure that it was all working. I noticed what was broken by DPI-SSL. So again, Dropbox, maybe some game clients if you're into that sort of thing. I think something like Spotify. I think that stopped working as well. And then I decided that I wanted to allow those, and I trust, you know, I trust my game client, I trust Spotify, so I then allowed it. But that's why you start with a small group of people. Better to do it with a handful who are aware that some stuff is being done, and there may be disruption, rather than just enabling it, you know, for a 1,000-strong company, and then your poor support desk of 1 or 2 people is going to get inundated with calls. So, you know, you just have to be smart when it comes to this. All right, I talked about exclusions. We have a whole bunch built in. I'm not sure if that screen is big enough, but I mean, if you can see the text, I mean, stuff like iTunes, that's already allowed to exclude. So we will not scan iTunes. If we see iTunes traffic coming through the firewall, we will allow it through, and we will make an assumption that it's okay. The same goes for Windows updates and a few others. Dropbox is not on here. That's why I keep using that as an example. Okay, if I want to. I mean, there's log me in. That's also built in. If I think that I want to block it or I want to scan it for whatever reason, then you could just click on the edit button there and then reject it. Okay, so then you can block it. So that's what you can do with DPI-SSL. All right, there's the add button. And this particular user here has added a whole bunch of domains that they want to exclude on top of the built-in list. I mean, there's Windows Update. I can tell you that's already in there. But you know, Bank of America or anything like that. Online banking, that's another popular one that people allow. You might want to stick your NatWest domain or Barclays and so on. Okay, really handy button. This tells you what failures you've got. So once you've got it up and running, if this screen has got some stuff in it, that means you are breaking something and there's a failure to do the DPI-SSL for some traffic. I mean, there's a lot of jargon there, and you know, typically someone who's gone through the DPI-SSL training will be able to ascertain what's going on here. Or I could add these in exclusion. So if I trust MSN, I can add that. Telemetry. Sorry, that's just Microsoft. They're mostly Microsoft. What are examples? Okay, so it's MSN. It's a score research card. You could allow those. So all you got to do is take that, tick the box, and then add as an exclusion. Again, if you're going to do that, just be careful you don't allow something you don't want to allow. It's there for your safety. Okay. So then, how do you know it's working? Well, you know, you've got the little padlock there, and it will tell you that that the SonicWall has done the work, and even though it's encrypted, because we've re-encrypted and forwarded it to you, this shows, is this Edge? Yeah, that's Edge. Edge has done the job because you've installed the certificate. Okay, so that's great. All right, so that's a very high-level view. Now, without further ado, I'm gonna hopefully we've got some questions here. Yes, Peter, I can. Sorry, we'll come to that shortly. I'm going to unmute the line, so I can ask you all to. Actually, no, I don't need to. So he's on. Where is he? I'm going to get John from NetThreat to jump in as our special guest. Although thanks to him that this has been allowed. Are you there, John? You sound like you're on. You can hear us.
I don't know. Am I there?
Yeah, you're there. We can hear you fine. Welcome.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Special guest. That's lovely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to make us feel important. So there we go. I've just jumped onto that for you.
Quality. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the last half an hour or so. Really useful. As Alex mentioned earlier, and I thought it'd be worth mentioning again, there's a series of these webinar recordings now that we've done over the last few months, so it'd be worth people hopping onto that if you've missed any of them. They're on our SonicWall Online site or on the YouTube channel that we have as well. And yeah, just as Alex has mentioned sort of throughout the chat, thanks for that, Alex. We wanted to take a moment just to mention that we've got a service available sort of to help customers with the rollout of DPI-SSL. As you've seen, it's one of the things on these boxes and all the other vendor boxes that we do that's sort of slightly more complicated than some of the other services. So we've come up with a sort of deployment solution package for people that may or may not be of interest to some. Essentially, that includes sort of an initial consultation about sort of your network and the environment, some assistance with the rollout of the certificates that we've seen is one of the tricky parts, sort of setting up the SonicWall appliance itself, and then that post-deployment configuration, which is one of the most time-consuming parts, really going through and seeing what you do and don't want to exclude and sort of keeping on top of that list. So we have sort of a solution, a packaged option available for people if they want us to really take control of doing that for you. And there's an option on that for TZ and NSA customers. And we can also do the majority of that work out of hours as well, if that's something that you need to do. It doesn't tend to be a lot of disruption to the network in terms of sort of ongoing use for users. There is a firewall reboot, I think, required at one point in the process. So doing that out of hours
there is.
might be useful.
I didn't mention that. Good point, John. To enable DPI-SSL, you do need to reboot it. Good point.
So that's sort of there really to help people. I don't know, lots of people may not be aware that we have a variety of these sort of packages. We're not really very good at talking about them really most of the time. So we have a variety of these sort of deployment solution options available for different sort of technologies in and around the firewalls. It may be that some customers decide to obviously deploy it themselves, and that's great, and obviously they have support, most of them from SonicWall themselves. And the other thing that people might be interested in is we do a sort of post-deployment health check service. So if you do decide to sort of deploy the service yourselves, if you then want us to go through it and sort of check how that's been done, and also through the other sort of areas of the firewall, then our sort of post-deployment health check option might be worth looking at. There's information about all of those newly now, information about those on our website in the solutions section, so people can check that out on the SonicWall Online. The other thing I thought would be worth mentioning, obviously, is that this may necessitate a look at a refresh of some people's sort of appliances. Obviously, the most recent 6th gen boxes are really the devices to be doing this with. It's possible to license previous generations for the service, but it's prohibitively expensive, really, and they're also not very good at it. So if customers want to have a chat with us about upgrade options, there's some particularly good promotions around at the moment because it's SonicWall's end of year in January, so there's some nice promotions available, sort of additional ones for people to upgrade to the latest kit with Capture and obviously with DPI available. So obviously give us a call or drop us an email if you want to have a chat about those sort of limited time offers. So I think that was about all I wanted to mention, really, Alex. So I guess we can hand back over to you if you've got some questions to answer. Obviously, get in touch with us, all customers, if you need any help with any of this. So thanks.
Nice one, thanks, John. Okay, so there we go. You know, you need not be left alone with this issue. And again, I can't reiterate enough. I'll be honest with you. About a year ago, when this was starting to become a thing, because of the challenges involved, because of certificate pinning, I'm on the record as saying, look, I'm not entirely sure that security companies like us will put the effort into this, you know, because it can be difficult. And I was wrong. I mean, especially from a SonicWall point of view, like John mentioned, our technology has been designed specifically to deal with encrypted traffic. It's another one of the reasons why we handle SSL VPNs very well. So from the Gen 5 range to the Gen 6 range, the number of SSL VPNs skyrocketed, and that's because the chipset allowed us to do it. And yeah, I don't think I can't remember the last time I went to a conference or a webinar where another one of the speakers talks about GDPR. It's a thing. You need to protect your data, and although it's not all primarily a firewall, it's typically, you know, a storage issue or a data storage issue. The firewall does play a part. If your firewall allows someone to get into a network and compromise customer data, you know, that's it. So it has to be configured correctly. So, okay, I can't emphasize that enough. What I'm going to do now, I mean, there's quite a few people, which is great, so I'm glad that you all could join. I'm going to unmute the line. So, I mean, we're probably going to get an influx of some background noise. So And at that point, I'm gonna sort of say, if you've got a question, if you talk over each other, I'm sure we're adult enough to go through that. So the floor is now open, or it will be shortly. So yeah, are there any questions? You don't be shy. We don't have to. You know, if you don't want to be the first person, that's okay. I get that. I typically do that, but you know, feel free to you know, to pipe up and ask. If not, I mean, great. Get in touch with John and the team at NetThreat, and they can help out. But you know, it just seems like we have the opportunity here to. So, okay. Yeah, I won't take that as trolling. I'm just assuming that someone's having issues with their microphone. Okay, well, I mean, if there's no questions, that's great. That's fine. The recording will be with NetThreat as soon as I can edit it. And hey, someone's eating their dinner. So in that case, I'll wrap this up. So, you know, last chance. Anyone has anything to say? No? Okay. So if that's all right with you, John, I'll end this session. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful.